And as I got up there and bringing myself up through an opening, I looked over to the port side, and there was a friend of mine named Polly. He was looking around, and I looked at other men. I could see they all had been crying because they heard that all of us had been killed, and that was an error. Someone had given them a report and didn't realize that some of us had already left. As I climbed up through that opening, I saw a young friend of mine named James Jensen, and he was sitting there on the deck, and he had on this flash-proof paste, and it had been washed away from his face by tears because he thought I had been killed. And he got over and crawled over to me before I could get fully up on the deck and put his arms around me. He says, Tibado, you helped me in Pearl Harbor when the sinking of the battleship West Virginia. He says, and you helped me all along. And he stowed away to be on that ship with me, by the way, and was accepted aboard. And he put his arms around me, weeping, because he was weeping now because I was alive, you know. And he says, I'm going to help you now. His clothes did fit me. I took all my clothing off of there, and all the guns were still firing. The beach was all smoking and full of dust. Battleships were firing. And I took my uniform and just threw it over the side. I'm sorry that I did that to you. I'd love to have that old ripped up uniform today. I'll tell you. Our executive officer, Commander Behan, bled to death here on the deck after the shell that made this huge hole exploded in front of him. It also wounded our gunnery officer, Croft, who was also wounded at Pearl Harbor and wounded many other men. Dozens of men were terribly injured at their unprotected battle stations. Here you can see a gun shield ripped like paper from such a terrific force, and paint chipped away by shrapnel. The Pensacola was hit by English 8-inch guns and ammunition that were captured at Singapore. The Japanese used them at other fortresses like Tarawa. The Japanese claimed that they would have sunk us if it hadn't been that their gun emplacements were made inoperable by a huge landslide caused by our bombardments. Our airplane was loaded with gasoline, bombs, and ammunition. A shell struck it and set a great fire, scattering debris and exploding ammunition, injuring many men, and a column of smoke rose several thousand feet into the air, as seen by everyone at sea. This is the hole that was made by the shell that spent most of its force in Combat Information Center, knocking out a vital nerve center, killing many men and injuring others, including myself. Thank God I survived. Notice the shrapnel holes on number 2 turret. At this burial, I not only saw the broken bodies of my buddies being dropped into the sea for eternity, but I also was aware of the broken hearts back home for each loved one here lying under Old Glory. Yes, broken hearts of parents, brothers and sisters, as well as wives and sweethearts that I knew would soon receive these sad tidings. These men would never return to the great land they loved and fought and died for. After the burial at sea, we carried all of our wounded below, and some of them were in way down below, decks down, and a few up in officers' country. We had to use the officers' country for a hospital or sick bay because our sick bay had been flooded in several other compartments. And as we returned to the beach, we had all these wounded below, but the hospital ships were too busy at that time, they couldn't take anybody off of the Pensacola when they arrived a few days later. And our men stayed below for 13 days, suffering below while we're firing at the beach. Some of them had casts on their legs, and if we had been hit again or sunk, well, they wouldn't have a chance in hell of getting out of there. But I fed them. A lot of men did turn to where our stations had been destroyed. We lit cigarettes, tried to bathe them a little and console them, and some of them wanted to kill themselves. And I can understand why. I could hardly stand staying down there. And they had to stay there in those bunks in their wounded condition. Some of them without limbs, some of them in severe shock for a long time. And we returned to that beach. In those 13 days, we took ammunition off one side